So now you should actually have Docker installed. Now, I just want to mention one thing for the Windows users first. If you kind of got through a bit of hassle where you had to restart a few times, it's because you need to enable the Hyper-V for Windows to kind of get this virtual environment up and running. So just follow the guide step by step and you should be good now and having a fully running Docker on your machine. Sweet. For the Apple M1 users, which is the new technology that Apple is using, there's actually also a way you can get up and running with your setup. You can just go and check out the Apple M1 Tech Preview, and it seems to be running. So you can just go and try that one out if you kind of want to dive into using Docker on your M1 machine. Sweet. So with that out of the way, let's get back to the guide. When we go back to the guide right here, you'll actually notice that the next step for us to create is to create this Docker Compose YML file. Now the YML file is actually a way for us to specify different containers or services that we want to use in this virtual environment that Docker is. So we're going to try and create this file right here, and we're going to start by creating it inside the root of our setup. So let's jump to our code base. I'll go all the way to the root of my code base, and I'll actually there go and create just a new file and just put in a Docker Compose YML file right here. I'll just add this file, add it to my Git, and just go back and copy everything in there from this guide right here. I'll paste it in there, and let's just talk a little bit about what all of this is before we actually try to run it. First of all, you have two different services that we're going to run on our Docker setup. The first one is going to be a Postgres. Now this is actually our database. That's the database that we're going to work with, Postgres database. What it says right here is we have a container with the name of Postgres. These needs to be unique for actually Docker to run them. Another thing we have is the image that we're going to use. This time we're going to use Postgres with the latest or the newest version of Postgres. The next thing is the ports that we're going to use. Later we're going to have to switch these ports if we want to have multiple Postgres running at once. Then we have like volumes. That's where we're going to store the data for the Postgres. And the final one right here that's important is that we need a Docker environment. We're going to build that in a second. Sweet. Then we also set up a network so we can communicate with others to the Postgres. For instance, we can set up pgadmin. Now, pgadmin is just a maintenance system for Postgres. So I'll try and show you. If you're gonna use to other environments, you'll probably have some kind of way to dive into your database so you can see what's actually inside the database. You also set up links right here to kind of link these guys together. And then we kind of set up a name again. We have pgadmin this time again. Remember, the name for the container needs to be unique. Then we have an image we want to use. And this time we're going to use the pgadmin image. Next is the ports that we're going to use, 8080. If you already used 8080, you can put in any port here that you want in your system. But the default one is just going to be 8080. You might get issues, so try one of the other ports if you want to. Another one is where should we put this? And again, there's a list of volumes that we can use. So this is how we store the data in the virtual environment. Then we have an environment file that we're going to use here as well. We're just going to use the same environment file for both. You could have different environment files if you wanted to. And then the final one is setting up just that we want to use the Postgres network here as well. And here it is, how we can bridge those two as the final thing right here. So that's the file that we're going to use to kind of get our Docker up and running. Before we start trying it out, we need to add one more file. That's the Docker environment file. And let's go back to the guide because that's actually also specified right here. We'll go back and we'll just add that file also in the root. We'll make a new file, Docker environment, like this. If it asks you if this is a text file, then just answer yes. This is just a basic text file. It's not a TypeScript file or anything like that. It's just a text file. Going back right here, we're going to add all this information. Now, this is going to be information specific for the actual, both the Postgres database and also for the pgadmin. Now, these are default informations that the Docker file needs. It needs the information about a login for the pgadmin. It also needs the information for the password for that login. So it needs these two fields right here in order to compose and create a pgadmin instance on our Docker environment. Also, if we go further up, it needs information about the Postgres. So we're setting up a user, we're setting up a password, and we're setting up a database. Let's just rename the database to actually be the chat app database for now. We can call it anything you want. There we go. Now we have that set up. And again, that will also be used in the YML file in order to set up the information for the Postgres database right here. So again, notice we're using that environment file here and here to set up the information we need for these two places. And the top one, the Postgres, is the top three ones, the Postgres user, password, and database. Now I read some posts that sometimes it might fail, so it's good courtesy to put the DB in front right here, just to make sure that before you create the user, the database is already set up. I read that, but it might have been fixed in later versions. Sweet. Let's save this. And now comes the next step to actually try and run this the first time. And the way you do it is just you add this command right here in your terminal. So I'll just start a new terminal and write docker -compose and up. That should be it. Now it's going to actually create and try and start up the environment. Now, if you haven't already downloaded these two images right here, it'll actually go and download the images for you from the Docker hub. So you'll get an image for the Postgres, you'll get an image for the pgadmin. Hopefully everything should be running, and you could now go into your Docker. Let's just try and start the Docker desktop. I'll go up here, I'll click Docker, and I'll do dashboard right here. Now with the dashboard open, you should actually see this now. You should see a Postgres running, that's the database, and a pgadmin running, that's the administration tool for the database. Let's try and see the pgadmin version right here by clicking this open in browser. And there we go. It should look something like this. This is just a local running web server that kind of has a pgadmin setup for you. Let's try and log in. Let's go to the code and actually go to the Docker environment. You should be able to use this now, the admin@com. I'll add that as the email address, and the password is just admin. I'll add that in the password. So that's kind of how those are bound together. Now that seems to be running. So now that we're logged in, we should actually be able to create a new server or add a new server right here. And we can just go and call it, let's just call it localhost for now. We can start adding more names later. And the host is going to be Postgres. That's actually going to be the one that we set up inside our environment files. And we're just going to use the password admin. And now this password and username right here, again, if we go back to the code, is the password and username you have right here. So that should match. Let's try and do a save right here, and it should pop up. There we go. We have localhost. We have a database. Here we have the chat app that we just created. Again, that's the name of our Postgres DB that we set up in here. And then the final thing we have is the default Postgres database that you have right here. Okay, now that's because Postgres actually uses Postgres internally to kind of set up all information for your Postgres setup. So don't worry, that should be there. We're happy about that one. Okay, so now we have all this set up. Happy days. Now, if this is actually not running, there's a few things that might go wrong. First of all, you might have a local running Postgres on the Mac or on the Windows. If you started this by mistake and this is green, it actually means that you have a second Postgres, and that might be the one you're trying to log into. That's not going to work because that's not set up with the route username and password. So make sure you don't have that running. Now for the Mac, it's just checking out if there's an elephant up here. For the Windows machine, you might have to go in and check out this guide right here where they explain how to do it. But it's very simple, luckily. You just have to go into your service MSE. If you don't know how to do that, it's Windows R, and then you write this in the command line. Then this window will pop up. You go and you find this Postgres. You right click and say properties. You go and set it to manual, and then you right click it again and say stop. Then the Postgres locally won't be running anymore, and you can get rid of that. So that's one way to do it. There's also a command to do it like this. So you can just go and stop that right now if that's the case. Just try again to log in and just try again to add your server. And hopefully after that, everything should be running. And you should be able to see your new chat app. If you didn't change anything from the guide, it won't be called the chat app. You'll call that server actually the NestJS database right there. So just so you know, if it doesn't say chat app, it's probably because it should say NestJS, because that's what he's calling it inside the guide. So that's it for this lesson. Now we actually have a running database inside our system right here. And next lesson, we're going to just continue having some fun.